Hi there, welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast, a show about passing on your love of cinema to the next generation. I'm your host, Jessica Kantor, and I have worked in all facets of the entertainment industry for the last 20 years, and recently became a mom. This week, our guest is Thomas Ian Nicholas. He's a writer, director, actor, and musician. We discuss his most recent project, Underdeveloped, which is now available on Tubi, Amazon Freevee. Most importantly, though, we discuss his love of the craft of cinema and how he is sharing that with his kids. Always remember that myself and guests are speaking from personal experience and not giving parenting advice. Let's go ahead and dive into the episode. Hi, and welcome back to the Raising Cinephiles podcast. This is your host, Jessica Kantor, and today I am here with Thomas Ian Nicholas, actor and producer and musician, most recently in Underdeveloped. And I'm so excited to talk to you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me here on the show.
Awesome. We'll jump right into the first question, which is, what is your first movie memory?
My first movie memory, I guess my first movie memories really started in the living room more so than the cinema.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just with, I grew up in an era where we just watched movies over and over again. So I'm my mom's only, but I also have half siblings that are a lot older than me. So my first movie memory is they would come home from school when we were living with them when I was about 5, and we would watch Star Wars, the episode 4, A New Hope, and they would basically just recite every line of dialogue at the same time in the movie, and that was just something that we did every day for weeks on end.
That's amazing.
And so, yeah, and then that just kind of became the language. Like I could call up any of my siblings, and if I asked them to do something and they said no, I could respond with, "But I wanted to go to Tashi Station to buy some power converters."
That's amazing. Do you have any memories, like first memories in theater? I'm just curious about that.
I mean, I have a ton of, I've been going to the theater since forever. My first theatrical film, it was Radio Flyer. So probably, I don't really remember going to movies prior to that, but I was pretty young. I was only about 8 when we went to the premiere of that.
Okay.
So that's probably one of my earliest memories, but it's not necessarily my first memory in cinema, but I remember in the late 90s, there was 2 iconic moments for me as an audience member.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the times when where the film itself made the audience react simultaneously. And probably the biggest moment of that was M. Night's Sixth Sense.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the feeling when it was revealed to all of us, and you could just feel the energy of the room shift together. And It was like, and then it became this like thing where now we have social media and it's #spoiler alert, but you just knew as an audience member to not spoil it for anyone, and no one did. And it was sort of unspoken.
Yeah, that was like one of the great reveals there. I went to professional children's school as a dancer, and I know it's so different. And so I asked this a lot of people who were acting when they were young, which is, are you able to suspend disbelief watching films as an audience member in the same way, as you would think somebody who doesn't really know movies?
Not always, unless the film is just undeniable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also different genres that do that as well. I would say there's a particular type of film that will draw me into the story, like a Shawshank Redemption. I mean, you want to talk about a cinematic moment in the late 90s. When that film first came out, it was a box office failure. No one went and saw it. No one knew what it was. I happened upon it. I went 7 times to the theater and saw this movie. And I dragged my friends there. And then, of course, when they got their nomination, the film was re-released and did better in the box office. But there's this like forgotten time period where I was going to this film and I was sitting in theaters with me and whoever I brought with me. And we were the only attendees. And
That's
this
crazy.
film, to this day, if it comes on something, I mean, I don't really flip channels anymore, but there was a time 15 years ago where we still had terrestrial TV. And if that film came on, like, that's it. That's what I was doing for the next 2 hours. And that film would just always draw me in. So there are times where the film can make me suspend my disbelief and completely rapture all of my attention. It also depends on what I'm going to see the film for. A lot of times now I'm studying filmmakers and, you know, and thinking about it from the wrong perspective.
Do you have a sense of when you developed your taste, like what you really loved in cinema?
I would say probably at Shawshank that I just really loved like those. I don't even know what you it's the narrative storyline. It's, you know, the hero's journey. I mean, it's not always just based on a true story, but the I don't know what you call that genre. Like it's not, you know, horror or, you know, fantasy.
It's drama.
Um
I think it's drama.
just drama, but there's so many
Yeah.
facets of drama. You can't just say drama. Like,
Yeah.
that's like saying you like rock music, and it's like, well, alt rock, pop punk,
Yeah.
emo, you know, there's
Yeah.
like so many subgenres to that. I mean, I do drama's my forte. And ironically, so like you mentioned, you are a dancer. So
Yes.
my grandmother was a dance instructor, and so my mom grew up in dance. She had like My grandmother was in vaudeville in Australia on my mom's side. So I was dancing at an early age, even before I was acting. And I always just, you know, I just love art and creation and all of those things.
Yeah. It's I mean, I think they're so interconnected. I had a conversation with Alex Winter, and he was talking about how he tap danced to get into the character of Ted, of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, because it comes from that background, and he needed to loosen up, and that's how he did it. And I think that's so. I mean, everyone has their way into a character, but I loved that anecdote of, you know, in this, I think, society, we don't do enough to activate our bodies. We do so much to educate our minds, but we don't educate our heart. We don't educate our bodies. And, you know, to do any sort of art, you have to connect those areas.
Oh, as an actor, the physical side of character work is so important. From what I'm wearing and how those clothes make me even feel is an important part, and part of the character development after I've already done my initial homework. But it kind of designs things further. And then, you know, if you're not giving your character the right feeling, it's not even necessarily how you look. If it makes you feel the wrong way based upon what you've already prepared, then you're like, no, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
There's also like for Underdeveloped, it didn't make sense to be a disgruntled producer who was passed up for a promotion and be in shape. So I had to gain some weight for the role, which I didn't do a lot, because I was like, listen, I'm not going to go like full board on this one. But that changed my physical feeling as well, and helped me be more disgruntled.
Yeah, it's hard to feel good when you're not taking care of yourself, you know?
Right.
So it's, you know, pretty authentic to be feeling that extra weight. So you mentioned that drama is your forte, but you're also known for a lot of comedy. So could you speak to that?
That happened because my acting coach and mentor that I studied with for 10 years, when I first started there, after a couple of years, he's like, okay, listen, drama is very easy for you, but you're only as strong as your weakest link. So let's work on your comedic skills and your timing, and really understanding that, so you can really improve your dramatic skills and just improve your overall skills technically as an actor. And so it was ironic, because I remember screen testing for The Good Son, which was, I mean, I wanted that role so bad. It was like right up my alley. My acting coach was like, oh, watch the original, The Bad Seed. And I didn't get the job. And then 2 months later, I got Rookie of the Year. And then of course, yes, I'm of course known for more comedy. But like, even like in regard to that, so Brian A. Metcalf and I have been working together for 20 years, and we've done more drama and horror originally, and fantasy and drama. And then on the last film was really dark. I went head to head with Mickey Rourke. And then he comes at me with this one with like, hey, we're going to do just this outlandish mockumentary comedy. So, who knows? Maybe on the next one, we'll do action. We're just going to keep flipping the script and just doing different things.
But that's so great. That's what you want, right? To not get stuck exercising the same muscle over and over again.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. And is there a moment when you decided to take your career into your own hands? And I'm just curious for you, if there was a moment or a reason or something that inspired you to really work with that acting coach, to really put in that effort to take your career to the next level.
I've always had it in my mind to be a character lead. And there's obviously some great ones out there that I've studied extensively. Daniel Day-Lewis, Gary Oldman, even more on a mass media front, Johnny Depp. They've all disappeared into leading characters and really like we're talking about suspension of disbelief. Like they are not the same person in every role in any way, shape, or form. But really the defining moment for me wasn't so much the character work as it was getting onto the producing side. Mm-hmm. And I remember my first film that I produced, directed, wrote, and starred in was when I was 22. I was still doing American Pie movies at that point in time. So that was just like, well, that's something that I can do to expand again my sort of stretch. And I think it would be an important factor for actors to work behind the camera at some point, because then you just have a greater appreciation for how much grueling effort it is, even physically, just as a PA standing on set all day that can't ever sit down for 14 hours. You would ask that person to go and get you food from the craft service table as an actor in a much different way, even if you just did that for one day. Mm-hmm. So there was that aspect of just expanding my creativity. But the other side of it came when I realized that I could take the driver's seat and design my career and go in the directions that I wanted to. And then there was a moment where it was like, well, I don't need to just sit around and wait for the next golden opportunity. And if it will come, when it will come, and the stress that creates, I could just go and make it. Mm-hmm. And that defining moment for me changed really in my 20s when I started working with Brian. And we've, like I said, we've been doing that now for 20 years, and we have produced a half dozen feature films, and we've taken our licks. We did a pilot a few years ago, about 8 years ago, that you never saw the light of day, and now here we are finally jumping full force into the television front. So yeah, it was really that moment that defined, like, not just taking direction, but taking the wheel.
Yeah. There's this Ira Glass quote that got turned into a really interesting video that I love. I play for myself all the time when I'm making work, and I show it a lot to younger people starting in their career, which is called The Gap. I don't know if you've heard it, which is when you first start making work, how there's a gap between what you create and your taste. And the more work you create, the closer you get to your taste. And so few people stick with it long enough to get to your taste. And I'm telling you this because I'm curious if you felt that journey as you started making work. I mean, you've been doing it for 20 years, you know your craft. You came into it with a knowledge, having done it as a child, but you have this like Shawshank Redemption probably as this bright star of the type of work you maybe want to make, and what that journey to close the gap for you.
Man, as far as taste, and it's funny because Brian will like pitch me an idea and I'll say yes before he's even finished the sentence, because the taste for me, really, if I really boil it down, it's just work. Work is the thing I love. Like when I say work, I mean like being on set. When I was a kid, going on 100 to 200 auditions every year just to land one job, the work was the reward. Mm-hmm. Isn't that ironic that I love my work so much that I felt like the getting the work was the grueling part, but the actual work was like the celebration. And
Mm-hmm.
meanwhile, that's the thing where you're really putting yourself out there, and you've got to be prepared for that. But it's also the idea too that, I mean, I don't necessarily know that there's a taste that has kind of, because obviously our tastes are changing always too.
Yeah.
Kind of like our own, my artistic tastes change as much as my taste buds.
Yeah. Well, it's such a blessing that you're able to make so much because your muscles are working, right? Like, you probably have a shorthand, what you both like, that sort of thing. I think, you know, that was another piece of advice someone gave me when I was really early in my career, moving from dance into entertainment, was as a dancer, you have this rush to make it, because if you don't get into a company by the time you're 18, you're not really going to be a dancer. That's kind of your window. So when I moved into entertainment, I just felt this rush I had, and I grew up around child actors who were already making it. And so I didn't want to be an actor, but I wanted to make a name for myself in the business. And she was like, take your time. You have your whole life to make a career, build your creative community, find those people you want to collaborate with over and over and over again. And because it can be lonely out there if you don't have people around you that you can trust. So can you talk a little bit about building that creative community that you have?
Well, I think, in also to add on to what you're saying about, work the gap and all that. For me, it's the idea of never give up. I've
Mm-hmm.
always known that I will always be creating, and whether it's in any artistic sense, in my career as an actor or as a producer or as a musician, songwriter, whatever it is, I'll always be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so my biggest thing has always just been never give up, meaning I know that I'll get to where I want to go because I'll stay here longer than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and because I'll still be here. I think I
Yeah.
even saw like Seth Rogen talking about it's basically just the only surefire way to not get where you're going is to stop trying.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes the thing that people want to achieve is just around that corner when they finally go, you know what, forget about it. And I just
Yeah.
know that I'll never forget about it. So, I mean, that's the idea, is that I've met and worked with plenty of people that aren't still pursuing their careers. So the way that I've kind of congealed with people like Brian A. Metcalf and Kelly Arjun is we just have the same mentality,
Mm-hmm.
and the same mentality of like, let's just get it done and let's do it the best that we possibly can. And we're always just pushing ourselves harder. There's no like clocking out because like, well, forget it, I'll do it tomorrow. It's nope, I'll stay up 1 extra hour and get 1 hour less sleep and still be on time tomorrow, and and still make it great. And then we just all
Yeah.
have that same work ethic and mindset.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's awesome to find collaborators that really match your energy and level and all of it.
It's the same for like with the show, and the fact that we even still get to release on September 8th, because we also have the same mindset of taking care of our cast. And when
Mm-hmm.
we signed the interim agreement with SAG, we agreed to that which the AMPTP hasn't.
Yeah.
And so we've agreed to give them their 11%, because it's not that hard to,
Yeah. I was happy to see someone who's in multiple unions striking able to talk to me.
Well, that's the thing, is that for me the messaging is kind of wrong right now, because you've got, and no offense to my peers who are talking about their lack of residuals for some project they did a while ago, while they're obviously doing okay now. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that they're supporting the strike, so that part's good. But that part of the messaging is confusing for the audiences, because they look at the success of the person talking to them about this residual thing and they go, well, what do you care anyway? You're fine.
Yeah.
And the real messaging for me is that this isn't a fight for me as much as it is for the 87% of SAG actors, of the 160,000 members. So we're talking more than 100,000 SAG actors that are making less than $25,000 a year. This fight is for them.
Yeah.
Because, as I talked about the choreography of, a film and all the elements that take place, we can't just like go, oh, well, as long as we have, the Tom Cruises of the world, we can just keep making movies. No,
Yeah.
there's more than like one actor per movie, guys.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, there are a few movies that just are one actor doing something for 2 hours, but those are far and few between.
Yeah. They're like basically stage play adaptions.
Yeah.
Or a brilliant Robert Redford movie of him on a sailboat. Those are the ones I can think of. It's wonderful that I want to keep talking about this show and that you're able to keep moving forward because of signing interim agreements. I'm going to get us back to movies.
All right.
And talking about your children. And I'm trying.
My son is also acting, and he is in Underdeveloped.
Oh,
He
amazing!
plays
I didn't
Tom
know
Arnold's
that.
son, and we obviously we were earlier talking about M. Night's Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
My son got to work with M. Night. He was in the movie Old. He was the main
Amazing.
kid on the beach.
Oh, wow.
And ironically, Brian A. Metcalf also worked for M. Night during Signs and all that stuff as a creative director for him. So yeah.
That's amazing. So do you, I know your children are a little bit older, but do you remember the first movie you showed them?
We didn't go to the theater, not till much later. My son has severe food allergies, so it certainly limits our but now that he's older, he can go, and so we've gone a bunch of times. I remember, I think the first because again, I told you from the couch, Star Wars played a big part on me, and I was a Star Wars fan before it was cool to be a Star Wars fan. When you were a nerd in the mid 90s for being a Star Wars fan. So I took him to see one of the newer Star Wars films. Obviously, big proponent for the original series, but still excited to take him to see the Star Wars films in the theater. I'm trying to think the first movies that I showed them. I mean, this is going to sound so bad, but I remember showing my son Rookie of the Year when he was 3. I know my face is. Luckily, this is just audio, so you can't see how red my face is turning. That I've showed my child possibly his first film. No, actually, to be fair, the first film that I showed him that wasn't a cartoon was Mary Poppins.
Okay, that's a good one.
I remember actually the moment when they came out of the drawing and the rain crashed down that he actually cried. And then we were like, maybe it was too soon. Like maybe 3 is too early to show something that's this fantastical. But yeah, so I think Mary Poppins was the first film that I showed him. And later that year, I also showed him Rookie of the Year. And I remember he pointed at the screen and he was like, "Daddy." And I was like, "How did you recognize me when I was 12?
That's amazing. Was it confusing to him? From a very young age, he knew that you were in movies. So how did that conversation happen with your son?
The confusing part for my kids is for a long time, and probably even still my daughter, sometimes they couldn't really differentiate between like animated versus live action. In their mind, it was the same thing. Like trying to get them to understand, like, no, that's drawn. These are real people. So that didn't happen until like the age of reason, really, which is probably when they turned like 7. I know it's hard to even like comprehend that one couldn't differentiate, but for them, it was the same thing. Like it was just as real to watch a story told with animation as it was with live action. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So my favorite sort of experience and again, it was during lockdown, so there was no theatrical experience, but still, the movie journey was during the filming of Old in the Dominican Republic at the end of 2020. I was there with my son Nolan, and he had like this stint that was like 10 days off, and they're like, "Do you want to fly home for the 10 days? Do you want to just stay?" And obviously because of COVID and the fear of traveling, we said we didn't want to take any risks for filming and like get COVID around that time. So we're like, we'll just stay. So during that 10 days off, we just went on like a movie binge fest. And cool. Every day I dipped into some of the films that I grew up on and started showing him like The Neverending Story and Flight of the Navigator and Goonies and Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3. And, just we went hard into like all of those things that I loved as a kid.
And how did he love them?
He loved them. And I remember he was 8 had just turned 9. And I remember we did like Willow. We watched Neverending Story, and he was just as frightened of the panther, if you remember, the at the end, the nothing, as it were, as I was. The fear of that of the nothing existed in this generation the same it did in mine.
That's awesome. That's a great list of films to show. And 8, 9, that's such a good age, because I feel like if they're a little bit older, they're going to not want to see the old movies,
Yeah.
Which I hear.
For instance, I was just away touring with my band in England for like 6 days. And my daughter, so I got a text that my daughter missed me. So she decided to watch one of my movies.
Aw.
Right?
That's
Isn't
very
that just
sweet.
Like heartwarming?
Yes.
I mean, that just melted me. I was like,
yeah, that's really sweet. That reminds me of that line from Almost Famous when Kate Hudson's character, Penny Lane, is like, if I want to see my friends, I just go to the record store. Yeah.
Totally. And it's funny. I shared that with a friend of mine who said his comment to me, he's like, well, I don't have the cinematic profile that you do. So when I go away for the day, it was like one of my bass players that I had jammed with. I went to pick up a drum head from him. And he's like, when I go away on tour and my kid misses me, then sometimes watches like home videos or like on the iPhone, videos of dad. And so it's kind of like technology kind of has given us that opportunity where, a kid can do that. We didn't have that when we were kids.
Yeah. I had an exhibition opening in Seattle when my kid was like 6 months, and my mom and a nanny were staying with him. It was like I think it's one of 2 times I've been away from him for a night, or 2 nights in that case. And I asked my mom group, will he understand FaceTime? What should I do? And they're like, well, FaceTime will be great for you, but he may get upset. So make some videos that they can show him over and over again, and he can watch it as he wants. So I would send videos, and that was the advice, which I thought was really interesting, that FaceTime would get him more upset.
I should have been a member of that mom group, because I did a tour when my son was 3 months old, and it was just like 6 weeks. It was the longest tour I had done. And when I got back, he was like frightened by me, like walking in the house. And that was like heartbreaking. And then I vowed to like never go on tour for that long again.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's so hard. So, you've made some films that are appropriate for your children to watch, and before you had children, but long before you had children even in your brain. But once you had kids, did that at all change the type of stuff you wanted to make?
No, it hasn't changed my pathway for what I'm making. It's clearly like, yeah, I was still a child when I made those films. So, Rookie of the Year, Kid in King Arthur's Court, they've both seen those 2. They've seen some other little tidbits of things that I've done. Like I showed like some scenes to my son of like an episode of Baywatch. But like everyone always asks me when I'm going to show my kids any of the American Pie films. And my answer is always the same. And it's never. Because there's no possible way at any point in time, at any age, that I'm going to be like, hey, let's sit down and be uncomfortable together. Because that would be like, they need to like watch that at a friend's house and not tell me they've seen it. Yeah. And then one day at like Thanksgiving, in their 20s, they'll be like, oh yeah, I saw that finally. And then we can have an uncomfortable moment and then move on with our lives. Yeah. So because I have those films that I'm not going to really share with them in that way. Because I remember how uncomfortable I felt at the premiere in the theater, sitting next to my own mother with her basically like, hand over her head, like kind of like peeking at the screen during my specific scenes that were maybe a little, yes, well, we know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, Eddie was in high school with me. So I remember walking on the street at a certain point. I think he was out of high school though when it came out. But I remember hearing people be like, "Shipwreck," and I was like, "That's really what like you have you're like that's
No,
awesome."
I've walked the streets of New York with him and heard people yelling that. I got really lucky because my character was the straight guy. Like I was
Yeah.
the abbot of the Abbot and Costello.
Yeah.
So people related to my character, but no one ever yelled like obscene things at me like
Yeah.
that. Um, so I dodged the bullet on that.
Yeah, definitely. And there is a world that maybe you may probably not those films specifically, but there is content that I've talked to other guests that have teenagers or tweens, and they talk about how they show their kids some uncomfortable content sometimes so that they can have those conversations about what's coming in high school, be able to talk through choices when the spotlight isn't on them. I don't know if the American Pie series has fallen into that group of films you would watch with your kids. It hasn't come up yet, but I'll let you know if it does.
I mean, I can't imagine that our take on that would be appropriate for that, but it is an interesting thing because I know like what my kids' friends watch is a big point of conversation in my house. Like, well, can I see this? And then it's, well, no, not yet. And then, well, my friend has already watched it. And I go, cool, I'm not their parent.
Mm-hmm. How do you make those decisions?
Because those decisions are based upon what you think your own child can handle. It's not an
Mm-hmm.
age thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't, just go to whatever that website is that,
Common Sense Media.
Common Sense Media, which, and go, oh, well, someone said a 7-year-old could watch it, because it's more about the tonality of your child and what
Mm-hmm.
you think they are able to comprehend and what their reaction will be. And clearly some kids can watch, more films that have more violence or more horror and not be as, affected by it.
Mm-hmm. And
some kids are maybe more sensitive, and then, you want to wait a little bit longer. So it's even to the point where, when you have two kids, by and large, stereotypically, the second kid's always a little like more fearless.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it's a point of contention for my son when he's like, well, I had to wait until I was this age and you're letting her watch it at this age. And that's also the problem when you have two kids that are 4 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
But she has a different mindset than he does. So therefore, it's not like Nolan got to see it at this age, so Zoe can watch it at the same age.
Yeah.
It's when will they be able to handle it where, I can explain the things, or they're not going to overreact or be like have a nightmare because we showed him something that was too scary or whatever it is.
And so did he see Old?
We left the theater. Have you seen the movie or no?
I have not.
Okay, so there's basically a moment where like it has like a turn into the thriller with like a tinge of like a peppering of horror.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were watching the film and we saw his character get older because he was played by 4 actors. Nolan's character was. And so we were like getting to like the third version of him, of that character. And then the film started to dip. And I think something happened where someone like swung a knife, cut someone like on the cheek. There was a, orchestral stab, and Nolan like jumped in his seat. And I was like, okay, now this is the time we're going to go. Mm-hmm. And so I escorted him out of the theater and we went and got some food while the movie finished. And there were 2 other kids there that were younger than Nolan, and they stayed and watched the whole thing. But they had a different tonality, a different sensitivity than I know my son does. And I remember after the premiere, M. Night, who really saw himself in Nolan, like kind of saw like he was like similar to how M. Night was at that age. He gave me like a dad to dad, like, hey, I saw when you left, and like that was the right time to leave. Like, good job, like good parenting.
Yeah, good parenting. Like, yeah, I mean that's also something to say about your understanding of storytelling and knowing the cues where maybe another parent didn't understand the cues and then didn't realize they should have left until it was too late,
Well,
and
but they didn't have to, because again, their kid maybe didn't have the same like sensitivity to it. Wasn't, I know that my son's, remember we're talking, he'd only just finally understood 2 years before that there's animated and live action. So his suspension of disbelief is just deeper.
Mhm.
And so then the effect of something that's, a little bit graphic would have more of a negative effect on my kid than it did on theirs. They obviously walked away from the film. They're like, do, everything's good. Nolan
Yeah.
would have been like asking me like 7 million questions at that time. Like,
Yeah.
well, why did this happen? How did they do this? And, I tried to show him the filmmaking when we were there. Like, I showed him the prosthetic limbs that the visual effects department, makeup effects, was working on. So, I mean, he knew the difference, but when you're watching it in the cinema and there's the sound and the lights and the
Yeah.
moment and it, and the editing, it's a different gambit. It doesn't matter if you understand that that's fake blood.
Yeah.
It don't feel like it.
No. Yeah. And how did that come to be that your son started acting?
It came to be, like I talked about, the stereotypes of two kids. The first child, by and large, and this is not, everyone, but I've talked to probably a dozen friends that have two kids that all have the same experience. The first kid, and I have a theory on this, the first kid is typically more intellectual, and they'll develop their intellect and maybe communication or whatever it is, like their intellect first. The second kid is almost aware of the older sibling, and it's like, oh, that's a threat. So they always develop their physicality first. They have better balance and climbing skills and no fear. And then they still end up in the same place. It's just what the body kind of tells them to do. So in regard to that, Nolan was very intellectual in that sense. And so when he started in school, he was maybe like, the social skills were lacking because he had just his intellect developed first. And so I put him into acting classes so that he could intellectualize his social skills and speed up that advancement. And I knew that that was something that I utilized just at school in general, because let's face it, school is a navigation of sorts of social interactions. And I think having the techniques to have control over how you sound and how you express yourself can make your navigation of that school system easier. So that was my goal. It was never to put him into that so he could follow in my footsteps and here's Dad's craft. It was, hey, use this for life.
Yeah. Skill
Because we
set.
kind of all need it.
Yeah. And school is a performance in a lot of ways.
Right.
So,
life is a performance.
Yeah.
I
how
mean,
you
it
show up
all
and-
really is. So having the techniques, it's no different than like the skills of using a knife and fork,
Yeah. It's,
which, is not innate. We're not born with them.
they have kids stand in front of the class and read a report without any skills in public speaking. Just doing it doesn't necessarily, it can make it really difficult as they grow older if they don't have those skills.
Right. Well, putting them in that position when they have no skills can affect how they feel about themselves. So I think that having that kind of those techniques can also help with mental health.
Yeah.
As you gear into growth and puberty and all of that stuff. So, I mean, it's all important. So again, that was my total goal with that. And then it just so happened that he really enjoyed it. So then I signed him with an agent, and the idea was, it was like father-son playing catch. We would get auditions for voiceover work. We'd work on the material. I'd record them at home. I'd send it in. Every once in a while, I'd get a call back. We'd go to like Nickelodeon for the callback, and he'd be like, "Can you come in with me?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course. I'm going to sit in here in the audition room with you." When he was like 6 years old. And it was just, that was our catch, was working on characters and doing voices. And then it just kind of developed from there. And then he got New Girl. And I tell you, when he was on set, he was the same way with me. Like when he was wrapped for the day, he didn't want to leave. He was like, this is awesome. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's do this.
Yeah, he caught the bug.
Yeah.
The real bug. So I want to ask my last question. What movie do you recommend I show my son so he falls in love with cinema? And again, it can be when he's a teenager, it can be when he's 8, it can be any time in his life.
Rookie of the year. No, I'm just kidding.
I will show it to him eventually.
Man, a film so he can fall in love. Like, I'm trying to think of, to be honest, Mary Poppins was the first film that I showed both of my kids. And it's dawning on me now that I did that with my daughter as well. And I think that cinematically that film is gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
The story is great. It has the element of, because they do that thing that Walt Disney created where they go into the cartoon world.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of can work for a young kid because you get that cartoon element. But there's something just like so perfect about that movie. And I don't typically like musicals as a cinematic experience, but that film is, one in a million.
Yeah. I the sequence with Dick Van Dyke playing all the music is just one of my favorites. It's like it's a dance, it's music, it's all of it in one. It's so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we used to like have like dance parties, like, what's that? There's that book with like the good night books, and like, they always show like the kids like kind of getting crazy before bed. We would do like the chimney sweep, dance like before bed to kind of like get out all the energy, before kicking it down for the night.
Yeah. Do you remember seeing that as a kid, like when that movie was introduced to you? Because you didn't bring it up in the earlier part, so I was just curious why you chose that film for your kids.
I do remember watching. I just don't remember when I saw it the first time per se. I feel like it was because I had access to like VHS and beta tapes at my aunt and uncle's house. My mom grew up in San Jose. That's where my grandmother's dance studio was that she taught at for 25 years, teaching like tap and acrobatics since she was in vaudeville. When I was there, I just had like access to everything, and it, or things that had been taped off the TV, whatever it was, or things that I shouldn't have seen. Like I remember watching Creepshow when I was like too young for it, when everyone was asleep, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to put this in. So I just don't remember when I saw it the first time, but I know that even as an adult, like I'll sit and watch that film and suspend my disbelief. I mean, it doesn't matter that Dick Van Dyke's accent is outlandish because it's just such a great story.
Yeah.
And it just draws you in where he's breaking that fourth wall, kind of like I remember just recently letting my son watch Ferris Bueller, and he's like, why is he talking to the camera? I'm like, oh, that's the best thing.
Yeah.
When you can get away with breaking the fourth wall. Yeah. And here's the weird thing. There's an adventure to Mary Poppins in a similar sense to Shawshank. If like from a tonality standpoint and how they both make me feel, they're vastly different films. One's musical family comedy, the other one's drama about guy wrongfully accused. But there's a tonality of like adventure that they both have. You talked about like taste. I would love to make that kind of film that has that journey and that experience and that kind of suspension of disbelief.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's a beautiful note for us to end on. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed the conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe. New episodes release every Wednesday. And leave a comment and let me know which movie you think I should show my son. Until next time, take care.